Tridala sprang up to her feet, almost as if the heavily laden pack full of rocks was not on her back, and planted her feet firmly upon the pathway of the Devil's Hook. Without a second thought, she began to sprint, knowing that the course was only the size of the shrine room. She pushed herself, taking each step in turn as fast as she could. She failed to notice that the floor covered in water was slowly transitioning to sheer rock cliffs disguised by heavy clouds. She was now running the actual Devil's Hook. As her lungs gasped for air and her legs burned, her mind started to wonder why she had not reached the turn yet. Surely I must have reached the other side of the shrine by now? She mused. Then, she visibly shook her head as she replied to her internal monologue. No, she angrily answered, just focus on the next step. So she did, taking each step as quickly as her body would allow, letting go of her expectations about when the turn would come or what awaited her once she finally returned to the barmaid. Her gaze, which was downward-facing, only focused on the next few steps, finally indicated that she had reached the turn and was ready to head back. Her mind wondered how quickly she had gotten here while her lungs and legs protested that the journey had already been arduous. Her boots dug into the stone as she stopped her forward momentum. Leaning down, her hands began to grip the stone. Finally, one boot fell off the cliff's edge, and she fell to the ground. The thud echoed off the mountains around her as she clambered back to her feet and started on her run back. Again Tridala just focused on taking the run step by step, pushing herself as hard as her body would allow. Eventually, the impatient view of the barmaid's foot tapping against the stone entered her vision, then her crossed arms, and finally, her expression of satisfaction. Tridala's momentum had carried her several steps beyond the barmaid before her body gave out, and she collapsed to the water-covered marble of the shrine, her lungs gasping for breath as her legs trembled. "Thank you," Tridala blurted out along with one of her panting exhales. "Perhaps there is hope for you." The barmaid leaned down and ran her fingers through Tridala's wet hair. "And just so you don't believe this is all a dream," the barmaid's eyes and lips suddenly flashed a sinister expression. A dagger's edge gleamed in the light pouring through the skylight, and the barmaid dug it into Tridala's cheek before drawing it across her flesh. As the pain shot through Tridala's body, her vision faded to black, and the sensations of her body changed. The cheek that the barmaid had just cut open was now resting upon curved metal, the bindings around her wrists and ankles were back, and a weight covered her entire body. She was still breathing heavily from the run excursion, and her legs may as well have been lead. She could also feel fingers trailing through her hair. "We're never going to be able to trust another thing she says or does." Felina's voice put the exclamation on what was a more significant point. Tridala knew they were talking about her and decided it would be best to continue playing along as if she was still out cold. "Your entire premise might be flawed, Felina," Handel chimed in calmly. "You're assuming that she was the one that summoned the sword back to herself. Unfortunately, we have no evidence to prove or disprove that assumption." "No evidence?" Felina snapped. "She does things without even knowing how or why. What more evidence do you need?" Handel sighed. "Sadly, the only person that might provide answers is in no position to do so." "Exactly." Felina responded sharply, "and she might never be able to again. She's dealing with a severe blow to the head, grief, and knowing the world's weight is on her shoulders. Yet, amazingly, she has some sanity left. She's stronger than any of us can imagine," Janglana's voice chimed in, much closer than the others. "She's also my daughter, and I'm going to trust that she'll recover and that we'll complete this quest." "That's not trust," Felina's words were starting to calm, "that is blind faith." "Maybe," Janglana retorted, "but what else can we do?" There was a long pause in the conversation before Handel chimed in. "Let's take account of what we know, or at least what we believe we know. 3 primary outcomes have occurred based on Tridala's journals about the past trials. The most common, and given what I know, the right choice is that at the end, the souls of the lost half-elves are returned to their bodies, and they live again. There is also a ritual where all the energy from those souls can be used to revive the magic of old, temporarily breaking the hold of the Artu, but they eventually regain control. Finally, We can also fail or give up, at which point light and dark will swap places. In this case, the empire of Iskander will fall, and a new dark empire will rise. That is the outcome I will never let happen, Prima's voice boomed in what was clearly a tiny room. I will not allow the kingdom of Iskander to fall. Of course you won't, Felina scoffed. Enough. Janglana chided as if scolding a couple of children. What disturbs me most is that doing what Handel and I would both consider right and good does not stop this madness. And that is my problem with all of this, Jan, Felina stated, her words laced with frustration and welling emotions. It's also what I think everyone here would consider the right thing to do, and if we're not here to do the right thing, then why are we even here? There was another long pause in the conversation. By this point, Tridala had caught her breath and taken stock of her surroundings. The cheek that the barmaid had cut open was comfortably resting on Janglana's greaves, who had covered her with a heavy blanket and tried to calm her by stroking her hair. Everyone else was gathered around and having a meaningful conversation. It's now time to decide what happens next. Should Tridala A. awaken and tell the group about her encounter with Ileana and the barmaid? B. awaken and tell the group only about Ileana? C. awaken and tell the group only about the barmaid? D. awaken and tell the group nothing, join the conversation guarded? Or E. continue to listen to the conversation, pretending to be asleep? You can vote by commenting or visiting the Patreon post of this story, link in the description below. Hope that you enjoyed this short,